Thanks, Helen. I'm here today to talk about our new program, Mineral Systems Collection. A few of you may have heard me speak last December at our technical workshop where I first introduced the concept of our reference collection, now named Mineral System Collection. And then after I do an introduction to that, I'm going to talk about some of the work we've started on Ernest Henry. So I'd just like to make some acknowledgements to our mineral systems teams. There's only a few of us around. You heard Vlad speak yesterday, and we also have Siraj here. Siraj and Dan are working at our Exploration Data Centre, and they're our high logger gurus. And also some of the work we've been doing with John Huntington, who's been doing some interpretation of these holes. So, like I said before, the first part is an outline of our mineral systems collection. I'd really like to talk about the rationale behind this project and also the approach and the way we're looking at talking to the different companies and scoping it out to try and build up our collection of physical samples, and also a case study on Ernest Henry, looking at the holes that we have in our reference collection, our follow-up sampling that we're doing, and some high logger interpretation. So really we're looking to build up a systematic collection of geological information and representative samples from key mineral systems in Mount Isa province at all scales. You heard yesterday there was a big focus on big data and a lot of the data that we're collecting, and part of this we view as also building up a physical sample collection of these deposits. So GSQ, we're the custodians of data and knowledge for Queensland, and it's our responsibility to maintain and grow existing drill core collections. So currently we have a drill facility in Brisbane, and we have one at Mount Isa, and we have the collections that used to be at Mount Morgan and partly from Charters Towers. So here's a map up here showing the existing drill core we have in our either Mount Isa or EDC facilities. We have approximately 1,800 holes across the state, but only 761 holes within the Mount Isa province. So have a look at there and you think, well, the spread isn't too bad. But post-1995, we've only had about 160 drill holes submitted to the collection. So this is post the discovery of a lot of the big deposits in the northwest, so Cannington and Century and Emest Henry. So what we have is actually not a really good collection of things that were discovered in that period, and also deposits that have been discovered since. And in the first year of our SREP program, when it wasn't officially a GSQ project, we were lucky enough to get some donations of core from Ernest Henry and around the Mount Isa deposit as well. So there's a big focus on collecting physical and building a physical and virtual reference collection of mineral systems. We're funded until 2021. We started officially this project in 2019. And the plans really are to build up a collection across the whole, not just Queensland, but across the whole state. So it's, yes, there's a focus in Northwest, but we realise there's a lot of deposits and systems that we haven't quite captured in Northeast Queensland and North Queensland. So it's an ongoing process that I hope will continue past this funding package. So the scope is to acquire drill core and data from the major deposits and current active projects. We've taken an approach to go from the biggest deposits and biggest mines currently and work our way down, because there's always a risk of mines closing up and trying to get access to that sort of core, and then working our way down. And the collection will be stored primarily at our Mount Isa drill core facility, with a representative set of samples housed in Brisbane. So it's more than just having drill core and collecting physical samples. We're looking to get geochemistry, mineralogy, petrophysics, geochronological data on this drill core to form a baseline of key systems, and this is involving some of our collaborative projects that we're doing with CODES and the University of Tasmania, looking at trace mineral chemistry of deposits, and also work we're doing with CSIRO, who are doing a lot of petrophysics on these deposits. And also, one part of it is getting drill core in our facility, but also we're going out to these mines and prospects, and we're doing a much wider sample, doing surface sampling, doing complementary drill core sampling as well. So what defines a representative sample of a deposits? So really we're looking to get drill core that go from ore body to proximal to distal and out to background. Now, currently from the sort of work we've been doing, we're finding it's quite easy to get drill core from the ore body and proximal, but as you start to go to distal and background, I find that it's sort of the drill holes that aren't necessarily kept within a company, or necessarily when you find your deposit, you're not likely to go and drill 2 k's away to see what else is there. So there's a big focus on copper gold deposits and silver lead zinc deposits, and we're looking to characterise mineral systems not just deposits. So while there's a focus, I said, on major mines and major deposits, we're looking at systems, so we're really interested in the copper cobalt, the gold, arsenic, bismuth, and also the molybdenum deposits and prospects, because really we're trying to work out how you can vector into big deposits, but then what are these other near misses look like, and are you actually close to a major discovery, or is it time to walk away? So in December, I put this slide up of areas that we were looking to focus on, and we put up Mount Elliott, Swan, Roseby, or Little Eva, and some follow-up work at Ernest Henry, and we were lucky enough to have drill core from Roseby currently at our core facility that arrived last week. We're going out next week to do some follow-up, this week actually, follow-up sampling at Ernest Henry, and we have a shipment of drill core spanning across the Mount Elliott and Swan system coming within the next few weeks to the core facility. And these are some other areas that we're focusing on get some. So we have the Overlander, Kelman and Elaine, where we've already looked at identifying drill core, and hopefully we'll be getting that to the core facility pretty soon. And then there's the other area. So predominantly looking at copper systems, but also going up to things like Dugald River and Wolford Creek. So now going on to the case study, we're looking at the Ernest Henry copper gold system. So it's a typical IOCG deposit in eastern succession, and from this map you can see it's a magnetics image that I took from Rick's excellent deposit atlas. You can see that you've got the Ernest Henry deposit, nearby you have E1 and Mount Margaret, and then you have similar prospects which were the FC targets to the north, so you have FC4, FC4S and FC4N. And one of the questions we had with this is how far can you see the alteration signature of the Ernest Henry deposit before you end up being in another system or another deposit? So previously we only had 1 or 2 drill holes through deposits. We haven't actually had enough data to go on having a look at this stuff. So we were lucky enough to get a whole bunch of drill holes from Glencore recently. So we have 2 drill holes. One hole is 1 kilometre, one hole is about 600 metres that go straight through the guts of the ore body. We have 2 drill holes that are going through the inner halo. So these are some of the early drilling that were done into the Ernest Henry deposit. And then we have a drill hole down the bottom, which was co-funded CDI drilling from about 5 or 6 years ago that was targeting potentially the deep extension of the Ernest Henry ore body based on a magnetotelluric target. And then to the north, you can see in the FC4 South, we have 3 drill holes that were drilled by GBM Resources. So part of our current work, we've had almost 5 kilometres of drill core scanned down in our Brisbane facility at the High Logger from core that's permanently in our collection, and we actually have this stuff available, so I have a link a bit later about how to access it. We've had 2 drill holes, so Ernest Henry 435 and 550 that go through the guts of the deposit have been scanned by TrueScan. We've taken approximately 300 samples from these drill holes, and they are jointly being worked on by Codes and CSIRO, and also we've been using the data from BRC, and that's for geochemistry, mineral chemistry and petrophysics. And we're also trying to work on similar samples as well, so we're using the same drill holes, we're collecting the same samples and then sending them across to the different work. So instead of having, disparate samples and different drill holes, we're trying to build up, the same sorts of data sets on the same holes. And then coming up tomorrow, I have a week of sampling 7 more drill holes, and I'll show you exactly the extent of those holes in a minute. So, hyperspectral scanning. So some of the first work that we've done on these holes is to try and get core photography and get spectral data built up on them. So we have the High Logger 3 down at EDC. Hopefully many of you guys know this, and we have all of our data that we've been currently scanning on the Ozscope portal. It looks at the visible near infrared to shortwave infrared and also the thermal infrared spectrums, and it allows us to detect oxides, carbonates, hydrous and anhydrous silicate minerals, and it also provides high resolution core photography. So I'm not a spectral geologist, that's Siraj there if you have particular questions, but the more and more I'm starting to use this High Logger data, I'm just realising how powerful it is. So one of the things I was looking at was some work that Geordie Mark did in 2004 to 2006, looking at the alteration and paragenesis of the Ernest Henry deposit. So this was done essentially on some drill holes close by, and essentially we're looking at, can you take these sort of postage stamp type studies that have been done in university and research and then start to apply them more broadly. So stage 1, you have your early albite and then biotite magnetite alteration. Stage 2, you have either K-feldspar to garnet-rich veining, fine veining, and then you have more pervasive K-feldspar alteration. Stage 3 is predominantly mineralization, and you have two different versions. You have the matrix supported ore and crackle veining, and then stage 4, that's not shown on this diagram, is later fluids, and predominantly that's a lot of carbonate veins coming through. And up the top, you're going from distal to proximal to ore. So here's just a quick example from one of the drill holes that is in the proximal part of the system, and I just want to put up some pictures of rocks before I start talking about spectra. So what you can do is you can go hole by hole and look at the deposits separately. So you can go through and say, well, here I can see some carbonate alteration. Here it looks like I can see some of the early garnet veining that I saw mentioned. Some hematite, dusted albite that sometimes looks like K feldspar, and who knows, I've got a bit of both here. So essentially you can go by, you can pick out the areas and you can start to compare that with your assays. Or you can start using high logger data. So with high logger, these are the detectable minerals. So the highlighted minerals in red are minerals that we can't actually detect via scanning. So you're looking at pyrite, titanites, and the rest of your sulfides and fluorite. And in blue, you can see that if you have massive amounts of them in the core, you can pick up magnetite and molybdenite. But what that actually shows is that most of the minerals from the alteration from distal to ore, you can actually map across using high logger data. So it's really good, so you can interpret multiple phases of alteration by looking at spectra and then going between the data and the high logger photos. So I'm going to split up the core into two sections. You've got the bit down around the ore body, which is about 5 holes in total, which is looking at holes going between the ore body. I can't find my mouse. Oh, here we go. Through here, stepping towards going away from the system and comparing that to this deep hole to the south. And then I'm going to have a look at these 3 holes here very briefly, because currently we don't exactly understand how they fit into the system until we come back and sample drill holes through here, which is next week. So this is the picture of the ore shell of Ernest Henry at depth, and it's just showing where the holes sit. So I'm going to focus currently on these holes through the ore body here, and then 2 kilometres away we're going to look at the FC4S holes. So I find this is a really powerful image. This is looking at the hydrous minerals, and it's looking at the spectra of 4 of the holes within the ore body and 1 to the south. And already you can sort of start seeing patterns jump out. So one thing that's really interesting as you go from ore is that you can see that, oh actually, I think I even have, this is predominantly the best grades in these sections. So you can see that you have changes in carbonates closer to ore, where's my mouse? In here. And down here, the blues, you have changes from calcite to dolomite and siderite as well. As you go to the second hole, which is EH550, you realise that actually you're having an increase of hornblende, but whether that's a lithological or an alteration effect, you're not sure. And then as you step out to the other holes, so EH242 and 154 are quite shallow, but you're noticing there's a lot more alteration minerals and a lot more host rock minerals, and you're really starting to lose a lot of the carbonate that is associated with some of the ore alteration minerals. Moving into the anhydrous minerals, this is a really telling slide. So as I mentioned before on the paragenesis, you had a change from albite going towards K feldspar as you got closer to ore. So the first hole here, where are we going? I've lost my mouse, that's fine. Here you've got, in the light orange is K feldspar. So you have K feldspar here, and then you're going towards albite at depth. And then in the second hole, which is EH550, which is slightly deeper, and as you can see, it doesn't intersect ore till deeper down, you actually are more in the albite, so you have more signature of the early alteration, and as you're vectoring towards ore, you actually see more of the K feldspar. So one of the questions we had when we first started looking at this data is it actually looks like it's flipped around, because you expect to see albite first and then closer to ore is K feldspar, but the first hole actually starts in ore, and that's why you're straight into the K feldspar up here. So you're in ore, K feldspar, going out into the footwall, here in the hanging wall, and you're going down to the footwall here. Also going towards EH242 and 154, you only see K feldspar. So you're actually in that area of the system where you have that pervasive K feldspar alteration, and you pretty much lost all of your albite, which is really interesting. So I expected to see, as you stepped away, more of the early alteration and less of the K feldspar. So it's really interesting when you start to see these stacked up, what's happening. And then this deep hole across from the end, is an interesting one. So they expected to hit similar to the alteration ore approximately about 13 to 1500 metres down. So right down here when you start to see some of the minerals. But predominantly this is mapping lithology. So it's really interesting because you question with HiLogger, and because it's looking at essentially all of the minerals in the rock, it tells you what's there. It doesn't necessarily tell you what's alteration and what is the minerals that sit in lithology. So with a hole like this one, which is a really deep hole, it actually shows you the background signature of what's in the rocks. So here it's really interesting, you've got your volcanics and then you go into like a marble unit. So you have a lot of carbonate, but it's actually carbonate that's unrelated completely to alteration. And as you're going deep, you're down into some phyllites and some shales, and you start to see a little bit down the bottom of K feldspar that is probably related to alteration. So this is a slide now looking at the first 4 holes going through Ernest Henry, stepping out towards the MMA holes, so the FC holes. And you look straight away, they look different. So you're already seeing a lot more chlorite, specifically that's the green up in the hole. The holes up to the right, you see a lot more hornblende. So what this is showing you is that, well, is it showing you? This question, is it showing you more lithological changes, or is it showing you some of the early alterations? So there is a lot of chlorite that's evolved in the biotite magnetite alteration that you see early, or are you just seeing host rocks? We're not so sure. Coming to the anhydrous minerals, which I think are a bit more telling, there's a lot more albite, there's a lot more plagioclase. So, and there's only a tiny little bit of K feldspar in MMA 01. Now MMA 01 and MMA 02, they had a little bit of copper mineralisation, so a little bit approximately 100 metres to 200 metres, and then a little bit at about 530 metres, but predominantly there's just not much copper. But you start to see, as you're going deeper, more and more K feldspar. Now, whether that's related to the Ernest Henry system, we haven't started pulling apart the particular minerals yet and started to get into details, but it gives us an idea of now, when we go to look at the holes in between, what sort of things to start looking for sampling. We know what's actually changing. Do these minerals completely change when you're a kilometre away from Ernest Henry? And then this FC, well, similar sort of magnetic target, are you in a completely distant system altogether? And one of the interesting things actually that you can map from here is if you look at the sulfates. So the sulfates are in this green colour here. They pick out obviously ore pretty nicely. So we didn't have any assays for these holes, and just by looking at the HiLogger data, looking at these really early summary screens, you could pick ore within 1-2 metres and maximum about 10 metres I was out from coming in, picking exactly when ore was kicking in and kicking out. So it's really powerful, and the more and more I just stare at these screens a lot because I feel they're really useful. It's really nice to see the big picture of the hole and then start to see what's changing as you're stepping away from a system before then you go back to pull out particular things. So I didn't want to bring out lots of spectra and show lots of really complicated diagrams, but it's really nice when you have questions like, am I in hematite dusted albite and hasn't been overprinted by K feldspar, you can actually click through the spectra and find out exactly what you're seeing there. And in summary, we're focusing on building physical and virtual reference collection, supporting a number of SRPE projects, and essentially the deposits and the prospects that we're getting core from now is really going to be driving the basis of what the GSQ mineral systems are doing over the next 2 years. So essentially the core that's coming in, we're going to be doing high logging, we'll hopefully be doing similar XRF scanning, we've got programs to be doing multi-element geochemistry. That's something that the mineral systems group we're taking on board to try and characterise all of these deposits. And looking at geochronology and a whole bunch of other things. So, if you're interested, if you're keen, we're willing to sort of work with you, sit through and have a look at ways to capture representative samples from your deposit, and then we can continue to work on them. So the first one is Ernest Henry, as I've just mentioned. This is ongoing. We're doing 7 more drill holes in that gap between the FCs and Ernest Henry proper, coming up in a week to do some more samples. And then we've just been out in the field doing some work looking at the Mount Elliott Swan. So we have approximately, I think, 3.5 kilometres of drill core that will be in our reference collection from that system. And we just sampled another 4.5 kilometres. So going from Mount Elliott proper all the way down to Swan to try and characterise, and then stepping out 1 kilometre, 2 kilometres, stepping away from these systems to see, can we get to background? And in that area, probably not, to be honest, but we'll try our best. So that's it. Thank you guys very much. Thanks.
Principal Courteney. Rob.